All right, welcome. This is very exciting. Thank you all for making it here today on Wednesday, right in the middle of the week, for this super exciting topic. I expect this to be very intriguing fireside chat style discussion today on the topic of royalty reporting in a streaming world. First off, why are we having this discussion? Because software is eating the world, everyone's moving online. The amount of content that's being consumed online is growing and taking over market share. So this is highly pertinent for anyone who's in the film and television industry today. And also very timely, given that we're emerging out of a pandemic now, and majority of the content consumption is moving online. So what are the key takeaways I hope you all have from the conversation today? Essentially three things. First, be able to appreciate the current challenges in managing royalties in a streaming world. Second, gain a perspective on where this is going. And third, what to do about it. And we'll try to do something interesting today, which is to bring together the perspectives of the content sell side with that of the content buy side and the technology side. So just to put things in perspective, the sell side typically in a media value chain would be the production company that's producing the content and selling the content. In many cases, that would be the distributor. The buy side typically would be the streamer in this case. And the tech side would be somebody like a cloud platform. So with that context, let's get to know the speakers today. I'm really privileged to have them here. If you heard the little chit chat before the webinar began, you'll know this will be an interesting discussion. So Getz, may I invite you to introduce yourself first?
Thanks so much, Arjun, for having me. My name is Getz Grossman, and I think for the topic today, I was the CFO of FilmRise for 6 years. I left FilmRise a year ago, but the 6 years before, I was privileged to be the CFO of FilmRise. And as you might know, FilmRise was a real pioneer in streaming in many different respects, both on the subscription side, on the ad-supported side. The company acquired a lot of wonderful programs and continues to be extremely successful. But as part of being a pioneer, you also face all of the challenges that come with anything that has to do with royalty reporting, all the data that comes your way. How do you ingest all of it? How do you prepare it for reports that you owe to partners? So it was really a wonderful challenge being at the cutting edge and having to work through a lot of these issues.
Thank you. Imke?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, Arjen. My name is Imke Roos. I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm currently CEO for a company named Dutch Channels. Not surprising if you're in the Netherlands, right? Anyway, what we do is we own and operate a few SVOD platforms. You could say we're very much like Netflix, but the main difference is that we don't focus on mainstream content or mainstream services, but we try to serve different niches. And we do this not only in the Netherlands, but also in the Nordics, in Europe, and also in the UK and in Australia.
All right. And I'm Arjun Mendy. I will host the conversation today. And I will bring the perspective of the tech platform in the scenario. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Molten. We started out of Cambridge, and currently we serve film and TV companies across 6 continents of the world. Essentially what we do is we're a cloud platform that reimagines core operations for media companies and helps build those operations in the cloud. Essentially looking at rights management, content management, and financials management. So you can imagine this topic is something I obsess over as part of my day job, and very excited to dive into it today with Getz and Imke. So let's get started. The first question, I think the starting point for this entire conversation is, what's the problem here? What's the fuss all about? haven't we been paying royalties for decades? So what if people are moving to streaming platforms today? So what if they're watching it on computers or tablets instead of traditional television? What's the problem here? Getz, would you like to kick this off and share some perspective?
Sure. Just maybe I'll take a step back just so, to share my perspective on this space. If you compare the streaming world to the world that existed before, call it theatrical, call it TV distribution, syndication, videos, the amount of data that was generated by this distribution, maybe you have like thousands of data points, videotapes sold, movie tickets sold at, different theater chains reporting to you. And so it was still a manageable amount of data. You could still wrap your arms around it. And since the industry or so much of the viewing behavior has moved to streaming, that has changed completely. So whether you have a couple of hundred titles or thousands or maybe 100,000 titles, you might be getting millions and millions of data points delivered to you from the platforms every month. And so they're out of just that sheer volume of data that's coming your way, it's creating so many issues. The first one is volume, of course. How do you manage the volume? And what you see happen, and Imke can speak to that as well, your systems start to break down. Maybe historically you've used Excel and you very quickly exceed the capabilities of Excel. Maybe you start a SQL database and that becomes too rigid. So the traditional means that we had to create royalty reports just don't work anymore. And I personally find it fascinating to be part of the industry that's moving so fast. There's so much innovation. There's so much value that we provide to viewers for entertainment. And we always assume, oh, there's a perfect software solution out there. Oh, we think they're good processes. Oh, people solve it so easily, but they don't. It's all of this, so to say, we are really at the cutting edge. And it's upon us to have communications like this, where we talk about the issues, think about together what are great solutions and how can we address them to the benefit of everybody who's participating. So then, I just rattled a couple of issues that one might run into. The next one is what I would call data normalization. So each platform would report to you in a different format. So how do you even ingest that? How do you create structures that allow you to just get all of this data normalized so you can put it on a like-to-like basis? The next issue that you might run into is data. Often the platforms don't accept your IDs, right? So a very important part of your process might be to assign IDs the moment you consider a title for acquisitions. Then we can have a discussion around when should you assign the ID, and I hold that you have to do it as early as you possibly can. But so say you actually manage to set up your system with cohesive IDs from start to finish, you might not get the platforms to accept your ID. So when they report back to you, how do you match those revenues back to your rights system and your royalty system? So then the next question is your royalty system actually fully integrated with the rights system? Obviously, they work so closely together, and that is a core consideration. If you don't, how do you make sure that those two systems don't get out of sync? And so I could just rattle off more issues that we're all, I think, facing. But maybe I'll turn it over to you and Imke to hit some other ones.
All right.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. I mean, the data and everything, and I totally agree. And it's become fairly complex. But let me start off with just a small story. A little while ago, I read a book by Mark Randolph. He was one of the founders of Netflix, and I think their first CEO. And the book is called That Will Never Work. So interesting title. And it basically describes their first, let's say, 8 years or something of existence. And of course, Netflix didn't start out as a streaming service. It started out as an online rental for DVDs. And once it got started and the technology worked and people were actually, they were actually buying DVDs, not so much renting DVDs, but that's another story. They had to go out to acquire the rights, right? So they wanted to have every title that was available on DVD. They wanted to buy the rights to be able to sell it through their platform. And the interesting thing, the paragraph or the chapter that describes this basically says it was very complicated. And why was it so complicated? Well, first of all, the rights were scattered around. There were lots of companies dealing with different rights. 9 out of 10, they were difficult to get hold of. Nobody actually knew who had the rights for this title and that title. And it was just a very complicated thing just to buy rights. And I can totally, it made me laugh when I read it, because I thought, well, here we are 20 years down the line, and it's still complicated. And apart from the data and the integration and all the data points coming to you, which I totally understand, but from a buyer's perspective, just to figure out who has the rights, where do I go to, how do I get in contact with these people, how can we make this work, sometimes can be, you know, a very long and painful process. And I think this also has to do with the fact that traditionally, I think a lot of distributors, well, a lot of producers and distributors would sell rights per territory, right? So let's say they've produced a movie or a series or whatever, they would go for a distributor in the country or a broadcaster in the country, and they would sell the rights for that territory. But I think now with physical, you know, disappeared and linear TV deals getting smaller, so regional deals getting smaller, less and less titles actually get distributed by local distributors. So they don't get sold per country anymore. Well, the big titles obviously do, but the smaller ones, it's getting more and more fractured. So we do actually a lot of deals directly with producers and distributors, but they're not organized that way. Very often they're still traditionally organized per country. And so if we want to air, let's say, a movie in 4 different territories, very often we have to go through 4 different salespeople just to get the rights for the one movie. And we can have 4 discussions and 4 different prices and deal structures within the same company for the same title, for the same rights.
And I think that is just remarkable, because what it means, you know, from your royalty system is you basically have to set up 4, you know, the platform doesn't care. The platform just reports on that title into you, right? And you might get 4 different reports from 4 different platforms in 4 different territories. And then, so to say, your rights manager, your royalty system has to be able to divvy up, you know, exactly where's the money coming from for which title, and then, you know, channel it through to 4 different waterfalls and report to 4 different parties accurately.
Yes.
I mean, just this one example, I think Gimke is perfect, is in just, it kind of highlights some of the complexities that we are facing, especially if you work across different territories and with, you know, a myriad of different licensors.
Yes, exactly, because you're right. You know, sometimes it can be with the same company and we just have to go through different salespeople, but sometimes they're with different people, they're with different companies. You know, so we actually have titles which are in our backend. It's the same video file, and it's, for us, it's just, you know, a click. Will this be available in Norway? Will this be available in Sweden? Will this be available in Belgium or Australia? But from a rights and royalties perspective, this one piece of content, it can have 3 or 4 different contracts with different rights owners, with different deal structures, with different reporting, all on the one title.
Can you talk about all the types of deal structures you're commonly running into?
Yeah, so
How creative it's becoming?
we started out, you know, if you start out, it's interesting to work on a rev share, because that sort of makes it possible to add content without a huge upfront investment. So we started out with rev shares, and we are more and more working towards MGs or licenses. And the reason why we're doing that is because the rev shares have become so complicated for us to calculate. I mean, and when we just had one platform in one country, we started out with an Excel file and we thought we could manage. I think in year 2, with different platforms and different territories, the guy who did the report started out with his own laptop. And I think after 1 or 2 months, he came back and he said, I need a bigger computer. So he got a bigger computer, but you know, next quarter for the next report, all of a sudden he took one of the video editor's computer to run his Excel sheet because the other ones didn't work anymore. And I think it ended up with having a NASA computer trying to run an Excel sheet, which by now has run out of lines. There's no more lines available just to try to do this report. And I often wonder, why is this so complicated? And then he tries to understand, but it's exactly related to this. So we have viewing time across different territories, across different platforms, all connected to the same title, with different deal structures, with different companies, with MGs that we have to compare against, and blah, blah, blah. It's so complicated. And now I think we've come to a point that we said, okay, no more. So for us, it's now more easy to go to license, because then we don't have to deal with all the reporting stuff anymore. But apart from that, you know, it's doing this without a well-connected system is just undoable.
And I think Susie, the experience that I had and the experience that Imke had is true for a lot of people. And what is, I think, often a challenge is there are people who actually, you know, the actual teamers have to do the work. They're charged with sorting this all out. And it becomes so complex. It's beyond a single person or a small team's ability to do that. And they have to communicate that within the organization and get the support to get the tools that they need to do that. And once you start that, it becomes an incredibly complex task, because the first issue is the data that you have to that point. Is that actually accurate, right?
Yeah.
Do you, you know, so are you going back in time to double check that everything is correct? Because, you know, once you set up, for example, a new system that is able to handle all of these things, you need to have confidence that everything is correct. So that's a mammoth task. So within your organization, you have to lobby and say, look, we need this. We have all sorts of contractual obligations to report to our partners. We need to get this right. But our systems are breaking down, and the work processes are not, they just get overwhelmed. They can't do this anymore. So I think every organization, whether you're a studio or small distributor, at some point, earlier or later, you get to this point where you have to say, look, we have to find this new solution. And a lot of the existing software tools, they're just not designed for that. They're structurally, they are software solutions from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and none of them can handle this volume. None of them are flexible enough to actually generate all these different reports and deal structures that they're changeable on the fly as you need it. And I think so. I think there's a lot of, I would imagine there's a lot of discussions in a lot of organizations. That's what is the best way? How do we handle this? And, you know, one way is to, of course, Imke's way. Imke is running his own service, and he can say, look, I'm not doing any revenue share deals anymore. But I think, you know, and that's a good choice, hopefully for him, but that's not the reality that a lot of people find themselves in the industry, because they might have existing contractual obligations, and it might be good business model for their organization and their partners. And so I think there's an imperative to address this, and an urgency, because the volume of data becomes just larger. You know, from my perspective, I was a CFO, so there's a fiduciary responsibility towards all of the partners that we're reporting to. So you have to get it right. So you have that mandate, but what if your system doesn't keep up with that? So I think it's a very pressing matter.
Yeah.
So to summarize, I think the points that you've mentioned are, first was around the scale of the information. Second is around the data normalization. There's some level of heterogeneousness in the data, whether it's IDs or the formats. There is an element of integration of the entire pipeline of the calculations. Imke mentioned the point about just being able to pull avails or available rights is a challenge in a deal-making scenario. and then complexity in deal structures, creative deal structures for the same title, multiple deal structures when you're doing rights in deals. And then just systems breaking down is another point that was brought up. So these are all, very real points, and I can share some perspective from where we are sitting at Molten. Given that we have the benefit of working with, dozens and dozens of companies across the world, we are starting to see patterns. We are starting to see repeatability in problems that people are facing and how they're trying to tackle this. So I think all these points that you mentioned are accurate, and we see this every day, day in and day out. One of the challenges is that when you're getting revenue data in, at that point, there is a complexity because, if you just look at the US market today, there are more than 135 streaming platforms in existence, and that number is just going up. In fact, I pulled this one chart that we were just talking about before this webinar, which I found very interesting as a lens into, what's been happening during the pandemic, and now as we're emerging out of it, what's the big impact on consumption behavior? So this shows video consumption for theatrical and home video. If you look over here, the physical is, of course, dwindling. Digital is skyrocketing, and theatrical is recovering, but not to the same extent that it was at earlier. So what's happening is majority of this is moving online. Everyone that was, on television is considering moving online now, whether that's through fast channels or SVODs or AVODs in the industry. So there is a mass migration towards streaming. So we're starting to see heterogeneousness in the revenue data. Platform one or streaming app one will never have the same revenue format of reporting as platform two and platform three and platform four. So it comes down to the distributor to then figure out how to collate all this information and make sense of it, or the producer that's eventually getting the data. So that's one problem. The second problem, to In-K's point, was around rights, deal structures, and availabilities. It's often not appreciated how multidimensional the rights data is. People usually, when we onboard them, we see they have their own internal definition in organizations of what a right is. And usually they will think of a right as a license type for a certain territory. Like, okay, we've got SVOD rights for United States or Mexico. That's actually not the entirety of rights. There's another implicit statement there that there's a time window there. But there are many, many dimensions of rights. And if you're going to do it right, one needs to figure those out. So there's the license type, there's the territory, there's the title scope, there's the date range, there's the platforms, languages, exclusivity, and deal structures. And there are a few others, but these are sort of the highest level points.
And loopbacks.
Yeah, exactly. So all of these come together to sort of create this mega bomb of complexity that we're talking about. I think the final point that I'll comment on was from Getz around flexibility of systems today. And to take a very specific example, during the pandemic that we saw was the emergence of new types of rights. Of course, we're slicing rights thinner and thinner, and we're seeing people license, thinner and thinner components of their rights. But one of the big ones that we saw a lot happening was just emergence of new types of rights. And one of them was PVOD, or premium VOD, which is the idea that you can now buy theatrical content online, which didn't exist a few years ago. And for a traditional system to even grapple with that meant, completely re-architecting the wiring of the system and building new databases and things like that. So there's got to be a better way. But before we get into that, how about we touch upon what are the usual approaches to addressing these problems that you have seen in your experience? So, we've established clearly that there's a problem, right? But in your experience, have you seen any manual or software mechanisms that have been deployed to varying levels of success to address these challenges?
Yeah, maybe I'll start off, Imke, if you don't mind. So, I mean, you know, say you had 50,000 or 100,000 titles, and the volume of, I mean, I think it's the same for smaller companies, but the volume of data that comes in is just mind-boggling, and you get it in so many different formats. So that you have to go through the normalization process and then the ingestion process. And how do you even do that? And so to say, from my experience, one thing that you can do is you can hire very specialized software vendors that use very specialized software and manually build this. It's incredibly cumbersome. You know, these software, so to say, experts, you pay them by the hour, and you end up with an enormous bill. And you manually craft a system which allows you to ingest your largest customer data automatically, say on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, whatever it is. But that's not enough, because everything is always changing. The format of the reports that you get sent might be different next month and this month. There's no explanation, it's just different, right? So it's not that enough that you build this system once, your own bespoke software ingestion system, but you then also have to keep it up. You have to hire really highly specialized people who understand the software tool that you're using, to then actually keep managing and tweaking these ingestion processes. Is an enormous effort in terms of, you know, resources that you dedicate, time that you dedicate, and it puts a real strain on their organization. And you can build it. It's just an enormous effort. So, you know, if the way I was always thinking about it, you know, if you build it as an organization, you might spend really significant amount of money just to build your own system. Is that your core expertise? Probably not. And does it make any sense? Because you're only building something that somebody else might be able to build much better, and then license it to companies in the same situation and create efficiencies for everybody, like any other software product. So from our perspective, well, my perspective was, look, it just doesn't exist as we're sitting there. At the time when we had the need, there was no solution. Molten was not offering that piece yet, or other people might not offer that piece yet. So we had no choice but to build it. But I think on a going forward basis, it makes a lot of sense for companies to outsource that function, because it's just enormous, and you just don't know whether that's really your core competency. But so to say, I think what you end up with is that some of these reports, the biggest reports you can automate, there will always be a part that you cannot automate for a number of reasons. The platforms are too small. It's just not worth it. Or you have things change. You know, a vendor might change the title of, you know, a platform might change the name of a title, or they assign a foreign title that you've never heard. They don't ask you, they just assign a foreign title. There are all sorts of things manually that can change. But what you want to do is you want to get your system as automated as you possibly can, so that, so to say, the fallout that you actually have to deal with on a month-to-month or quarter-to-quarter basis becomes a manageable amount, where the team then actually can drill down. We've never heard of this title. We're getting paid for this title. Where does it even come from? And they can actually spend the resources, research, and resolve those issues. But it's only possible if you're actually well set up on this fully integrated system that works with your major platform partners, and it's fully integrated with your rights system. Ideally, it's the same, that you have a royalty system that's seamlessly integrated, or it's the same system as your rights system. They're so critical that they work well together. But at least, you know, get yourself set up as soon as you can to just get out from under this cloud.
Makes sense. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, there's a different angle for us to keeping track, and it has to do with if you have a lot of content on your platform, you want to know when are the end dates of the content, which sounds really, really simple, but it's really crucial to know. First of all, because it allows you to do communication to customers saying, hey, this is your last chance, you know, last week or whatever. But very often also you use titles in, for instance, automations, you know, email automations or stuff like that. So if the title runs out, you have to take it out. So you have to be aware of that. You might use the title for marketing ads in an always-on campaign. Well, obviously you need to be aware of that. But also advance of the of the end date, you want to be able to do an analysis on the title. How did it perform for us? How did it compare to similar content? And ultimately, do we want to renew this title? And if so, then what would be acceptable terms? So this is a different perspective on on rights and royalties and the accuracy that is needed from a streaming perspective in order to be able to take titles off if you don't have the rights anymore, to make sure you do it on time and to make sure that you make the right decision whether or not to relicense. So yeah, that's something that's very important for us. And again, this is not something that we found off the shelf. To do this manually is a lot of hard labor. So yeah, ideally, you would like to have all of this integrated into one system.
Yeah. As we started exploring data for Dutch channels at Molten, we realized there are dependencies on viewing time, which is natural for any streaming platform. Could you comment on how those aspects of data, which go a little bit beyond just flat licensing fee, which can be added to which can be added to a spreadsheet model and just brute force it out, but a system that actually depends on live data like viewing time. How would one even go about managing that? Say in a pre-Molten, pre-automation world, how would one actually conceive of a system that can do that?
Well, you need a huge computer, a lot of Excel files, and a brilliant mind who spends about 2 weeks per quarter trying to, click it all together. That's basically how we do it, how we did it, I would say. And it was the only option at the time. And also, once you go down a certain road, it's very difficult to then abandon it and do something new. I mean, it's almost undoable. So
yeah, I'd like to second that. I mean, it really, speaks to the both the complexity, Arjun, that you framed, and the volume. And I think Imke just phrased it well. I mean, the success of you as an industry participant depends on you making good choices and good decisions. And you can only do that if you have timely, accurate data.
Yeah.
And so you have to find a way or technology that allows you to access the information that is being made available to you in a way that you can actually make really good decisions based on it. And so much great insight is included, embedded in this data. But if you can surface it, if you don't have a system where the team can go in and say, oh my God, this just popped here, or this didn't perform well, and then you see similar titles and all of this. So to say, bring a whole perspective to what is actually happening with your data, then you are participating with one or two hands tied behind your back. And that's, so to say, I personally feel our industry is moving so fast. You want to give yourself the best chance of success. So yeah, having a royalty system that ingests the performance data, the financial data, is incredibly important. And that ties both, so when I say performance, minutes streamed, ad-supported world, it might be CPMs, that is able to aggregate all of this data, match it back to the title, and then allows you to do good analysis.
So Getz, you have actually lived through implementations, enterprise-wide endeavors in digitizing this pipeline, right? Without obviously getting into any specific details, talking more at a system level, one of the implementations I run into a lot when I meet new organizations is some combination of manual processes with digitization. Yeah, I can see it's probably resonating with you. But if I double click on that a little bit, right? A few examples that I would run into normally are, say, contracts are stored in Salesforce. Financials are stored in some combination of spreadsheets for, ultimates calculations or something of that sort, with NetSuite on the back end, and say some rights management tool, with some content management tool, with some servicing workflow management tool, sort of a combination of these things, with Aspera as another tool, and you get the idea, right? And typical media organizations are comfortable with the idea of having analysts, legal, servicing, rights management, sort of teams across the organization that do different components of this. So can you just comment a little bit closer to the ground on, in your experience, has that system worked? Because you did go through an implementation of digitizing as much of that as possible, and say whether or not it worked, but was that effective? Was that an optimal approach? Is there something that really worked well, and is there something that didn't work so well?
Yeah, let me sort of tackle this a little bit in the abstract, but no, what you described rings true across different companies that I'm very familiar with and work with. And, so to say, the challenge is that everybody has a software system that they like and that they're comfortable with, and that, it's always so to say, how do you choose a system, and how do you stand up the system? So once you have a system that you like, people get very invested in, and they like keep using it. So I would say there's always in any company an inertia to say, hey, we need to change our setup, and that is, so to say, I think one of the challenges that every company faces. But when you just rattle it off, all the different places where related data lives, you just go instinctively, that is a mess, right? And because different team members have access to different information, and they can't, there is no holistic view over the whole perspective. So to the degree, I can only just say, so to say, it's my opinion, having worked in the space for a while, is to the degree that you can integrate your system into one system, or at least reduce the number of systems that you have, you create enormous efficiencies, and you create visibility that you actually need to run your business. I just want to, and each system typically has enormous limitations that make integration hard. You very much depend on your unique IDs. When you assign IDs, or other duplicate IDs, there's this whole issue. Whenever you have more than one system, there's a very good chance they run out of sync. And then how do you ever bring them back? So it's so to say, my one strong recommendation, to the degree that you can get institutional support, tackle that. But one thing that's just stunned or flummoxed me, at some point in my career, I worked with NetSuite. And as an accounting system. And NetSuite is a fantastic system, very sophisticated, cloud-based. It's a very recent business, owned by Oracle. They put enormous resources behind it. It's very complex. Any accounting issue that you might have, it's really well able to handle. But it can accept only, say, in the hundreds of, call it, journal entries, data, right? It's limited how much data it actually can work with or use, which leaves you as the user, who has millions and millions of data points a month, in a very strange place. It basically means that you have to do your, all of your ingestion, the royalty processing outside of your accounting system, and then reduce that to a manageable amount of number that this most of the cutting edge, sophisticated web-based system can handle. That's the challenge we are facing. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Makes perfect sense. So perhaps a good segue to the next segment. So in the next segment, let's talk about, what do we do about it? We've established that there is a problem. We talked about various aspects of the problem and what manifests it into something unmanageable today. We talked about some usual approaches, intuitive approaches, instinctive approaches to addressing that challenge. And what are some of the shortcomings of that, given the direction we're going in? Now, let's say in an ideal world where tech is not a limitation, and to sort of paint a picture, imagine you had a genie, a software coding genie, someone you found out of MIT, and that could code away any software problems that you have. Now, what would be an ideal approach to build a system that works? If you take a systems perspective and you do not have technology limitations, how would you put together a system that works? And perhaps we can start with Imke, given that you're at the monetization end of the value chain, and then work backwards from there.
Well, it's a complicated question, I must say. If I look at the amounts of data that we get in on the data, we're a data company, basically. The amounts of data that we gather and that we have to process are just humongous. I mean, and we keep adding more and more data engineers and data analysts to just cope with this. And one of the things that is quite crucial is, are we using the right data, and are we using the data from the same source? Because indeed, I mean, there's viewing time, which is very important for us, because that's basically where we decide where we use our content strategy, and as a result of that, our communication strategy, and as a result of that, our marketing strategy. They're all related to viewing time. So that's a biggie for us. Then of course we have all the subscription data, which is of course very important, because we want to know how much money is coming in, which is complicated, working with so many aggregators in so many different countries and with different subscription formats. It's a lot of data coming in from that side, which has to be accurate, because hey, in the end we have to report as well, right? So financial reporting in that area is crucial. Then we have the acquisitions, so our content acquisitions. Well, first and foremost, we have to have access to new content, which we have to acquire, which means that we have to do the acquisition, and then we have to do the contracting. Then we have to insert all the relevant contract data into our content management system. Sure. Then of course we have the reporting and that's where the time where everything comes together, right? Because we need the income for that, we need the viewing time for that, and we need to know the content deals and all the bits and pieces we need to do a good report from that. So you can imagine the amount of data that we get, and I think we are very close to having all of those lined up, using one huge data lake to start with. But as Gert says, the more systems you have, even though you try to downscale it, the more data you have, the more sophisticated the systems become that you're using. At the same time, the risk of something not going out of sync, or one source is not getting the right data for the other source, and blah blah blah. This becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger issue. And as you're growing as a company, I mean, we're currently around 60 people. You cannot expect someone who is doing the scheduling of our content. He just wants to look at the reports that he uses, or the dashboards that they need in order to do their job. You cannot expect them to, well, if they might see a glitch, they might see, that's strange, I don't see any data coming in for, well, that's an easy one. But if it's 10% data missing because of some sync at some system somewhere, who's going to notice, and who's going to be able to address that, and how do you then prevent from wrong decisions being made? So it's a biggie, and we haven't Well, I think the only way to solve this basically is have enough bright people who are not trained monkeys, as I would say, but who understand the whole process and who are able to look over over the wall, so to speak, and understand what the other guy is doing as well. I think this is the only way. So we have a lot of multidisciplinary teams working together on projects.
Yeah.
So everybody sort of understands. They don't have to know all the details, because that would be, a waste. But at least to have a basic understanding of what's happening within more than one person within the company, so that you can not only work together more efficiently, but also notice if something's going wrong somewhere.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So essentially, the points you're making are around connecting the different components of the operations,
Yes.
having people empowered with the visibility across the stages of the operations, so they're able to troubleshoot and diagnose problems. They're able to even preempt problems, I suppose, if they have that level of visibility. And then, of course, there's no replacement for getting the right people for the job. So that's from the streaming perspective. Now, as we go upstream, the streamer reports to the distributor and then to the producer. Gets, what are your thoughts in an ideal world? I think life gets more complicated for a distributor. For just everyone in the audience, a distributor is going to be working with dozens of streamers and broadcasters and other organizations that they're licensing to. So in your world, I think the problem starts manifesting, multiplying. So what are your thoughts in an imaginary world? What would be an ideal system for you?
Yeah, and an ideal system would be a fully integrated system where you have all your data ingestion, your royalty reporting, your waterfall setup, and your rights management all totally integrated.
Yeah.
And that sounds easy, but you really, if you can get there, that is so key. And then the flexibility, we hit on this early, that you actually, I looked at the rights tree, that I was working off, or we were working off, I want to say 7 years ago. And then I looked at it recently, and the rights had just multiplied. Yeah. And so you need a system that accommodates that. That is actually, just from the way the software is designed, allows you to make those changes. So fine, you made the changes in your rights management system, but they have to translate over into your royalty system because you're reporting to third parties. So an integrated system will just serve you in such good stead and enable you to do what you're actually contractually obliged to do. So it's my strong recommendation, and people at least consider that. I think this whole ingestion part, normalization, ingestion, automizing all of this data and this process to the degree that you can. And then I think what Imke said is so critically important too. Once you have all this data together, and which enables you to then once your waterfall set up, run your royalty reports for your partners. They might also ask for performance data. When we're talking about, so to say, royalty reporting, we think just of the financial data, but there might be partners who say, look, we're happy to give you our content, but as partners, we also want to understand how it performs. So then you not just have to share, so to say, the financial side, but you might also be sharing performance side. So again, your system has to be flexible enough to ingest all of that and separate it between the different partners that you're working with accurately, and then report to one person, the financial side, to the other one, the performance side, maybe both. So all of that the system has to be able to do. And then in the perfect world, what you really want is also for all of your assets to live in the system. So you have your information, a team member can go in and find all of the associated performance information. So if I'm a salesperson, I can see, how did this TV show do compared to another TV show? Oh, it did really great. So I can use that when I talk to the platforms to really sort of say, have them feature this TV show. So different team members have to have access to them. And then if they at the same time have the sales materials in the system, they discover that they're like, it's a very actionable item that they stumble on. They say, oh my God, I know this platform is looking for romantic comedies. This romantic comedy performed so well because I was able to access the performance data immediately. And now I have all of my assets in the same system, all my sales tools, my sales sheets, my trailers, whatever might be. I put quickly a nice package together and boom, I send it out to my platform partners. They understand, they get it in real time, they understand immediately what I want. It allows such good, fast, actionable decision-making on everybody involved. And same on the acquisition side. If they can just drill down, see, okay, this did well, this didn't do well, they can pursue certain things, certain themes. They can have conversations with the analytics team, say, give ideas of what they should focus on. And maybe on the operation side, to the degree that you have to deliver to different platforms, if all of your elements actually could live in the same system, you could even deliver out of the system to, say, platform X, Y, or Z. That, I think, would be a perfect solution to this enormous issue that everybody's facing. All
right. So perhaps a good time to then insert a technology perspective on that. So, representing Molten was fundamentally built to address this problem, a fragmentation of media operations. And our ultimate vision is to build that ideal universe of operations that you both described. Essentially, the starting point that I'm seeing from this conversation, and also something that is core to Molten's approach, is the idea of integrating these operations. Now, to take a step back, the way we went about designing the system was, that we cannot band-aid existing architectures. We cannot go to, these half-built, half-automated systems where portions of them are done by consultants, portions are done by in-house systems, and there are 10 different, vendors that are involved in the entire technology pipeline. It just gets cumbersome and error-prone. So the way we went about doing this was, we essentially took a platform approach. And the idea was, the way you can run apps on an iPhone, the idea here was, if we built an underlying data normalization layer, we would be able to run apps on top of it, which interact with that data in different mechanisms and different lenses. And that gave us the ability to integrate the different components that you're talking about. So there's the rights management component that both of you mentioned. Then there's the content management component, which is around, content hosting, delivery, performance information. And then there's the financials and the royalties component. So we're inching towards that ideal universe. Now, I'll throw it over to you, MK. You've gone through the stages of automation. You started with Excel sheets, broke computers, then moved over to NASA computers, broke those, got great people, and then started working towards further and further automation as your systems grew. So could you comment on where you felt that Molten as a technology would be able to get you closer to that ideal vision of operations?
Well, I think that, as I described, I think that having a system that that looks after different components within the chain is crucial for us. The good thing is that we can start from scratch, in the sense that we came from Excel sheets, so it was easy. This was still, this part of the pie at least was still a blank page. And I think what we liked about your solution was that it was indeed something that, first and foremost, I think you understand our business very well, and you understand, the needs that we have, and you were able to integrate. Well, we're still integrating, but I think we're almost done. It's done at a very quickly, I think. And you've obviously done it before, so that for us, for me at least, I was only, I wasn't involved in the project, in the implementation of the project, just in the decision making. For me, what was very important, and that you guys understand what it is that we do. So it's not the first time you come across this problem. You've probably seen this problem 10 or 20 times and say, yeah, I understand what you mean, and this is how we can solve this. And of course, we're using X, Y, and Z software solutions, but in principle, the solution is the same, and you've dealt with it before. So I think that was very important for us.
Gotcha. So we're almost up on time here. Final remarks. Thoughts on where you think the streaming world is going in the next 3 to 5 years? Getz, do you want to?
I'm super bullish. I'm super excited. I think it's the future of watching content. You know, the numbers that you put up on the screen, you know, bear it out. I think there is this enormous opportunity. I think obviously the ecosystem is still expanding. New services are setting up. A lot of players are successful, and you know, I just enjoy to be part of it. But I think, funny enough, every organization will have to address there. So to call it the plumbing, right? Making sure the systems are keeping up with this enormous opportunity that everybody has. And it behooves, I think, everybody to invest, really spend the time to think about what is the best system for them, and put the resources behind, you know, optimizing that, call it that backend, that infrastructure that makes everything actually, you know, move in the right direction, and will enable, you know, people to succeed in this space.
Makes sense. Imke?
Yes, well, of course, I believe I believe great things are still happening, are about to happen or will continue to happen in the streaming area. It would be strange for me to say anything else. But in all honesty, I do think that moving forward, I think being able to share more information and get data also from the distribution and partners about, you know, shows that did well somewhere else, or, you know, could be suitable for us, or even, you know, taking our feedback back to the producers or back to the creatives to be able to produce more and more tailor-made, or, you know, specific for certain niches that really work with a certain audience. I mean, for us, that would be fantastic, of course. And, you know, we're open to share that information. At the same time, I have to be realistic that, you know, although some distributors are very advanced at this, there are also a lot of people who haven't really started, in all honesty. I mean, it happens more than once that we get offered the same title twice from different companies. You know, that's the other part of reality that we have to look at. So so I would say, as a distributor or as a producer, you know, jump on the wagon and make sure that you have your system set up properly, and you are able to provide the data that needed, and also are able to process the data that is given to you, in order for everyone to be able to do a better job. And that will help the spinning, you know, accelerate the spinning wheel, so to speak. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I just want to build on this for 1 second. I think it would be really good if different participants got together and started a dialogue with the platforms in terms of, so to say, you know, what information are they providing, and, you know, them adopting the publishers or distributors' IDs. You know, there are all sorts of very prosaic things that either, you know, that I think could be so improved. But if just a single participant goes to them, they're like, yeah, okay, they have a concern, we don't care. But I think if more and more people voice these issues that we're facing, changing formats, you know, like, it would be great if the platform would give you heads up, you know, 2 months in advance, hey, we're going to change our format, and this is how it's going to impact you. Or that, you know, if for example, one could establish one template of how data is reported across different platforms, if you could get them to, so there's a lot of efficiencies that could be created that would make everybody's life so much easier. But I think it would be great if there was a forum that could start that dialogue and speak on behalf of quite a number of companies.
I think there have been attempts like that, Movie Labs, EMA, you know, a bunch of MRSS feeds. I find it hard to believe that every organization, or even a majority of organizations in the space, will just conform to a format, given they have different incentives and, you know, different motivations. So at least from my perspective, if it happens, it's amazing, right? It makes everything better. But if it doesn't, we should still keep innovating towards, an amalgam layer that absorbs all these heterogeneous data formats and normalizes it and makes it usable. So I suppose my concluding remarks on the future would be, we want to go from months of work per task down to milliseconds. That's about it. And that incorporates all the automation that is required, all the connections that are required, normalizations that are required. And that's essentially what Molten's striving to do. So we'll conclude here. We're a few minutes over. I really want to thank both of you for sharing your Wednesday afternoon and sharing these really valuable perspectives with me and with the audience here today. For anyone in the audience, if you'd like to reach out to any of us here today, there's an email address on the screen, partnerships@moltencloud.com. Feel free to shoot us a note. We can get into more details, whether it's about Molten or even if you need an introduction to the other panelists, we'd be happy to do that. Really appreciate everyone's time here today. Thanks, Imke, and thanks, Getz, very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you
It
so
was a
much for
great
having
pleasure.
me.